Amen. Good morning. Welcome to Bible study. I hope you all are staying warm, or at least trying to. We got to get some heaters in the front side of this building. All the heat's in the back. Amen. We are continuing our study series on resolving conflict, and going to be doing this for a number of weeks, examining the issue of conflict. You know, conflict is one of the unpleasant realities of life. It's frustrating, of course, but relationship conflict is just one of those things that we deal with in life. And so some very practical truths that we've mentioned already, but are worth discussing and bringing up each time. Of course, the obvious, everyone has conflict. If you don't have conflict, you're in a coma. And then I would imagine probably while you're there, you're imagining fights you used to have. Right? Because we all do that. You argue all day long inside your head with people that aren't fighting with you. But the truth is, most people do not know how to resolve conflict. They don't have the ability, and that is what creates crises in life. But the Bible has given us wisdom for resolving conflict. And there's a number of truths we're going to emphasize over the course of this series. Each week we will examine different aspects of this. But number one, conflict is a heart issue. It is not about only the facts or the data or who did what to whom, but it's a heart issue. But resolving conflict is a matter of understanding. It has to do with understanding things. We'll talk about these in greater depth as time goes on, but understanding means more than just knowing what did they say or do, but maybe you need to understand why, or maybe you need to understand why you feel the way you do. Understanding is a crucial issue, and then, of course, resolving conflict is a skill. I believe that wholeheartedly. And this is one of the great truths about progressing in life, is you have to learn the skill of resolving conflict. An interesting business book I read some years ago. It was written to people that are in high levels of leadership. And the basic premise of the book was, maybe your business skills got you to this level, but your business skills will not take you higher. It's going to be relationship skills. And that is kind of one of the points of this lesson series, is that your skill in resolving conflict is going to be key for you progressing further in life. So today we're going to talk about communication and conflict. We're going to discuss the role that communication or the lack of communication plays in the issues of conflict. So let's get, first of all, our text, Ephesians 4, verses 1 through 3.
Therefore, the prisoner of the Lord beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace.
Okay, this is our foundational text for this series. So, conflict and communication. Let's talk about that first. Conflict and communication. All human conflicts will involve problems in communication. All of them. I believe that is universal. Think about the original sin. Right? Eve was the first one to sin. She was the one that took the forbidden fruit, but God holds Adam responsible, which is interesting. Genesis 3, verse 9.
Then the Lord God called Adam and said to him, "Where are you?"
And there's an interesting interplay here. If you think about what's happening with Adam and Eve, there was something that was not properly communicated from Adam to Eve, and that is why they ended up in that predicament. We see that Adam was the contributing factor. Of course, he failed to clearly communicate what was expected of them. Genesis 3, verse 3.
But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die.
But see, that wasn't true, was it? See, God told Adam, of the tree in the midst of the garden, you shall not eat. That's all he said. But somehow, by the time the message got to Eve, what she heard was, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it. Now, of course, that was a long time ago. Who knows, to parse all the words and how that was communicated. But it is clear that Adam did not communicate this clearly to Eve. Then you could argue that Adam failed to speak up. Adam was there when Eve fell. It says she took of the fruit and ate and gave to her husband. If you look at the context there, there's a number of clues. Number one, it does not say she went to find him. She didn't go and hike on a long journey to find him. It was kind of like, hey, this is delicious. Have a bite. He was right there, but he didn't say anything. Right, and so who knows why he didn't say anything? Maybe he was embarrassed. Hey, wait, don't do that. We're not supposed to do that. Maybe, he was afraid Eve would get upset. That's common in marriages. There's things that you feel like you ought to say, but then you go, oh, man, I don't know if I should say this. I don't feel comfortable. Maybe they're going to be mad. Have you ever been with someone and they got something on their face and you really want to say it? But man, if you say something, maybe they're going to be offended. Why are you, So who knows? But the point is, there was absolutely a communication problem at some point along the way. So a failure to communicate is one of the great sources or causes of conflict. It will cause conflict. It will cause conflict to be prolonged. It will enlarge conflict. It will make things more painful than they need to be. There's the story of the tribes as they cross the Jordan. 2 tribes stay on one side. They build an altar as a witness and a testimony. This was a good thing. But the 10 tribes, when they hear about the altar, they're very upset, and they're about ready to go to war and kill everybody. That's literally what they said. We will go to war and leave no man left standing. Why? Well, first of all, the 2 tribes didn't communicate and say, hey, listen, this is what we're doing. Just so you know, it's not what you think. The 10 tribes, when they heard about it, they didn't ask. They didn't go and say, hey, what are you guys doing? And so because they were not communicating properly, they were about to have a war. I bet we could probably right now have an altar call, couldn't we? How often is that the case? Why did you say no? And then you discover, oh, they didn't say that. Oh, I'm an idiot. When you could have said, is it true? Did you say this? Right? And you could have avoided all of it. But see, a failure to communicate. Or, why weren't you home at such and such a time? I was worried. I panicked. I called your mom. When you could have just called and said, hey, I'm running a little bit late. There's traffic. So, communication issues are at the heart of many conflicts. So, the first area of failure to communicate is usually in the area of expectations. Expectation, if we're to define it, is a strong belief that something will happen or the way things will be. We all have expectations in life about all kinds of things, but especially in relationships. In every relationship, you have an expectation. If you're married, you have an expectation of your spouse. Here in the church, you have expectations of the way people will treat you. You have expectations of me. I expect Pastor will act in such and such a way. He will say this, or he would never say this. We all have expectations. That's not evil, but we have to understand that expectations are there. And the problem is we very rarely communicate them. Think about the kinds of expectations we have in relationships. We expect that people will respect us, right? Is it, man, no one's agreeing with me on that. Ay, ay, ay. Right? If you're in a relationship, we have a base level expectation. They will respect me at some level. They'll at least treat me like a human. They will be kind. Or if I treat you like this, I expect you're going to treat me the same. Those are expectations that are inside of us. If I help you, we have an expectation maybe one day you will help me in a time of need. Or we have expectations of what people ought to say. Or maybe things they should never say, or when they say it. This is true in marriage. We have expectations. How should you express love? You know, that's something, when you get married, can I just help you out? You should say these things. You should say, I expect you to, because everyone comes from a different background. You know, some people come from families where you say it all the time. I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. That's wonderful, but not everyone comes from a family like that. If you come from a family where love is communicated verbally, and you marry someone that doesn't get that, well, you're going to have problems because you didn't communicate that, right? We have expectations, you know, who's going to handle the money, right, and whatever. There's a million expectations that come in marriage. Many times they're based on past reference points. It's what we saw our parents do, or other people that we knew in life. And so we have expectations that are internal, and the problem is that internal expectations are very rarely expressed. Think about this. If you walked into a restaurant today, right, think about the expectations you have. Let's say you're going to go to, Chicken Licken. We have an expectation, right? If I pay for food, you're going to give me the food. Is that safe to say? I'll tell you, I've only been to Chicken Licken a couple of times, and I'll tell you why it's only been a couple of times. The first time I went there, the only thing that they were out of was chicken. And they were open. They were, if your name is Chicken Licken and you have no chicken, I think the sign should say closed, right? We went to the drive-thru. Yeah, what can I would like to get whatever the combo meal was. Okay, no problem. Sir, actually, we don't have any chicken. Okay, so I just ordered the combo meal that had chicken and chips and a drink, and you said, okay. Am I the crazy one? Right, I have an expectation. Right, you have more expectations, though. Maybe the food will be hot. The table will be clean, right? We all have those expectations, but we don't walk in and say that, do we? We don't walk in and say, attention, I just want to let you know what my expectations are. But see, that's true in relationships too. You walk in and you have all these expectations, but you never say them. They're all hidden on the inside. And because they're never stated, this is where a lot of conflict comes from. Luke 15:29.
So he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I have never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat, that I might make merry with my friends.
So here is the brother of the prodigal son goes, he comes back, the father gives him a goat, has this feast. And here the older brother, I want you to think about what he's actually saying here. He's saying, I never left and you never gave me a goat. In other words, he's saying, but I wanted a goat. But he never asked for one. Because the very next verse, the father says, behold, what I have was yours. The goats were here. If you want to eat one, eat one. But see, he was unwilling to express his expectations, but he felt justified being angry that they weren't met. Why didn't you give me, that was my favorite piece of chicken. I liked the thigh. Well, you never told me. Say something. Sorry, I know chicken's becoming a theme of this lesson. It's not in my notes, I promise. But here's the elder brother. You never gave me a goat, right? You should have known that I wanted a goat. And so, listen, when you are in relationship and you see someone get upset suddenly, all of a sudden they just freak out and they bring out all this stuff. It didn't happen suddenly. It was a long period of time of all these unmet expectations that suddenly blows up. Listen, people are not mind readers. Wives, let me tell you, your husband is not a mind reader. If you wanted to marry a mind reader, sorry, you made a bad choice. Right? What's wrong? If you don't know. You know what? Just say it. Just say, I wanted you to buy me flowers and a card and you didn't. Just say that. Because your husband will go, oh, I can do that. And he'll buy it. Right? Or maybe there's a good reason. But see, the people in church, they're not mind readers. They're not aware of what's going on inside. If you ever have these thoughts, you should have known. As if you didn't know. Right. I'm sure you knew. And what's wrong? Nothing. So, expectation. Let's stop there for a moment. I feel like I may have stirred some things up. If there's any questions or comments, raise your hand before we move on. So, talking about conflict and communication. If you've got a question or a comment, you can put your hand up so I can see it. No one at all. All right, Pastor Spa.
Pastor, as a leader and a husband, is it a wise thing to always communicate your expectations? Like, in a way that, it seems as if it's too much. Is that a wise thing to do, Pastor?
Well, it is always wise to communicate them, but of course, now you're bringing a whole other subject. Your expectations do need to be proper, right? Some people's expectations are way out of line. Right, and by 4:30 a.m. and by right. Okay, maybe your expectations are out of line, but that's a different lesson. But yes, you have to communicate these things. That's practical. Something that I think is a strong point in our marriage, Rachel and I, is that we communicate expectations well. You know what I would like to do is, next week, why don't we plan on doing this? Or hey, we need to think about. We talk about those things. So. Yes, you need to communicate expectations, absolutely. Very good. Anything else? Anyone else? Let me see your hand if you got a question or a comment. Okay, we'll move on. So let's talk then about the crime of the century, and that is avoiding communication. Avoiding communication. Here's the problem. Is that many of us avoid communication, especially about conflict, right? So we've already talked about how poor communication creates conflict, but listen, once you have conflict, if you avoid communication, it is always going to get worse. So some people, they are just avoiders. They will not speak about conflict at all, ever. Right? We've all met people like that. Maybe you are people like that. You see people, something's wrong. What's wrong? Nothing. Right? I don't want to talk about it. Right? If you don't know, then whatever. You're mad, I can tell. Let me help. Right? Listen, that's true as a pastor. I've had that conversation so many times. I always joke, I've got the best seat in the house. We swapped the stage around. It's great. I'm over here now because I can see everyone as they walk in the door. Listen, everyone is convinced their face is innocent. You all believe you have a good poker face. And let me tell you, you don't. That is human nature. Everybody wears on their face and in their demeanor what's really going on in life. And so, but there's a lot of people, they don't want to talk about conflict, ever. Right? Maybe they're just shy. I guess that's possible. Some people just don't like to talk. Many times it's because of bad past experiences, right? You've had conflict and you've had issues, and when you tried to communicate about it, it doesn't go well. You've been humiliated or you've been rejected. There's people in here, you've been victims of violence because of things like this. So you just shut down. You don't want to talk about it. And so the problem is that if you allow your past experiences to dictate the present, it's very difficult to get help. In the church, you're around people that love you. and you serve a God who loves you very much. But if your reaction to the church and to God is based on maybe your father or your family or your past, you're never going to get the help you need. So we bring our past experiences in this. Then, of course, a very real reason some people don't talk about conflict is because you have a bad past with this person, right? Often when we're talking about conflict, we're talking about old relationships. So you had conflict with this person in the past and it didn't go well. So now pastor's saying you need to communicate, and you say, heck no. Last time I tried to talk to them, they bit my head off. And so you've got a bad past with this person, right? They're going to make me pay. They're going to make life unpleasant for me. They're going to turn this into a national case. And so you just made up your mind you're not going to say anything about it. And then, of course, you often find people, they will connect experiences with other people to new conflicts. I've talked to people, and they're acting weird with me, and you begin to press and pry. Well, the real issue is that they're convinced I will be like someone else. Well, I had a pastor once but I'm not him, okay? But my dad, but I'm not your dad, right? I'm not your teacher or the person, all those. And so we connect things that other people have done, and we try to put that on. You know, if you come from a hard background, it's common. People bring the street mentality into the church, right? Snitches get stitches, right? And we bring that into the church. Because, let's be real. In church, we need to talk about some things. If someone's doing something wrong, you got to say, hey, guess what? Someone's doing something wrong. We have to talk about it. The Bible is full of that. Right? We talk about sin and issues, and we bring things to light. But the problem is we bring that old, maybe you weren't really a thug, but you hung out with some thugs, and you bring that mentality into the church. I ain't saying nothing. Right? And then maybe it's not even that. It's like if you say anything, right? Hello? Right? Someone, if you talk to pastor, I swear, I'm going to take you out back. And so, I've dealt with this in every church I've pastored. So we're bringing things in, and what happens is this causes people to avoid important communication. Then some people in conflict, they have developed the art of shutting down communication. I see this common in marriages. In many marriages, you will find there's one spouse, usually, maybe it's both sometimes, that they have a power dynamic in the relationship, and they've learned some tools to make the other person stop talking. Because, listen, this stuff is uncomfortable. If there's an issue, if there's a conflict, and your wife comes to you or your husband comes to you and says, listen, we need to talk. There's some things that are going on I'm not okay with. And the way you were acting or the way you were talking, I don't like that. And so some people, they learn if I can get them to stop talking, life will be simpler for me. So some people blow up, right? Every time someone, they just absolutely freak out, and then the spouse learns, you know what, don't talk about that anymore because they're going to blow up. So what you've done is now you've put a lid on communication. Sometimes it's emotion. Right? I've had many marriages. They come to me and the husband says, I try to talk to my wife every time. It's, you hate me. Right? And it's this huge emotional and so the husband's like, you know what? I don't even want to talk about these things anymore. So what's happened is now the wife has been able to shut down communication. But listen, the problem with that is when you shut down communication is nothing ever gets healed. Right? You can make people stop talking. You can blow up. You can get emotional. You can give them the silent treatment. You can make them feel guilty. You can make them pay. And maybe you're doing this intentionally, or maybe it's just a reaction. But the problem is you will never get better if you don't learn how to communicate about conflict. Esther 4, verse 2.
You went as far as the front of the king's gate, but no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth.
It's fascinating. Here's just a little glimpse into Persian culture there. But Mordecai, he's in sackcloth, and he goes to the gate, and he can't go any further because the law was no mourning or weeping or any bad news was allowed in the king's presence. Wouldn't that be awesome if you could make a law? If anyone tells me any bad news, off with their heads. Right? That would be amazing if you could. But see, that's what they did. And so, but think about that. Let's be real for a moment. He's the king. You know, if you're the king, you have to hear some bad news sometimes. Right? Like, the enemy is attacking. That's bad news. But kings in this day and age, they actually lived in a world where no one was allowed to give them bad news. But think about that. If the enemy is attacking, if he's trying to burn the city down, you need to know, don't you? But see, some people live lives like that. Your marriage is like that. There's people in here right now, your marriage is the no bad news marriage. We don't talk about that. Sorry, I don't want to hear it. Is there financial problem? No, I don't want to hear it. Right? Let's talk about something else. Right? They want to bring up a character issue or something that's wrong, and you shut them down. So the problem with avoiding communication about conflict is that it doesn't make it go away. It's not going to make conflict go away. Right? If you're in conflict with someone in the church right now, you can avoid them, but it doesn't make the conflict go away. It doesn't make things suddenly get better, right? It's not going to just magically go away. Only if it was purely situational would that work, right? If you were having a bad day because you had the flu, you could ignore it, and then later the flu would go away and you'd feel better. But that doesn't work in conflict, right? That just isn't going to make things improve. You know, there's a great lie that we've been told for years about time, right? And it is time heals all wounds, isn't it? That is the stupidest thing on the planet. Because it's not true, and it will never be true. All you have to do is live a little while, and you'll figure that one out. I've met some very old people who are very bitter and very angry. When I was little, I was driving with my dad. We went to some kind of hardware store in Prescott. This was back in the day before the big stores. You know, it was all privately owned. And this electric store we went in, I was just tagging along with him at work. And there was this huge sign on the front of the store that had these curse words on it, blank the Japanese. And so as a little kid, I remember thinking, I'm like, hey, Dad, what does that mean? He's like, hey, don't ever say that. Right? As a kid, I remember asking my dad, and he told me, he's an old war veteran, and he's still mad. But I grew up, and it began to click what happened. This was a man who was in World War II. That was his generation. If you're familiar with history, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. This is a U.S. base in Hawaii. That's what got us involved in World War II. Okay, so that's in the 1940s, right? I was a little kid in the 1980s. Okay, 40 years later. The man that owns this shop would be a very old man in those days. He had to be at least in his 70s by that time. And he is so bitter over an old war that we won, right? That the front of his story is blank those, right, and writes off a whole nation. I'm going to tell you, see, that's the problem, is time doesn't heal any wounds. Time makes wounds fester, makes them get worse. If there's conflict in your marriage and you think you can ignore it and it will go away, you're wrong. The only way that ignoring problems in your marriage makes the problems go away is that if you ignore them long enough, your spouse will go away. That's the only thing, because it doesn't heal anything. And so, it doesn't get better, but the truth is it gets worse. This is true in us. People who aren't able to communicate about conflict, you brood over it, right? You're seething, you're replaying these issues. There's people here this morning, I guarantee, that while you were getting ready for church, there was something going through your mind. And it didn't even have to happen this week. Be very old. Someone you knew you were going to see this morning. I can't believe they still are 1974. That's the nature of humanity. If you haven't resolved these things, they're just on replay. They don't ever go away. They'll get quiet for a while. Sometimes they go on vacation, but they always come back. So that's the problem, is that it doesn't get better. Then the problem is when you aren't able to communicate about conflict, you begin to reinterpret things. A lot of conflict is legitimate. You will have conflict with people in the church or in your family, and it's real. It happened. But the problem is when you don't resolve it, you begin to reinterpret the past. Let's say you had a conflict yesterday with a brother in the church, but now you're replaying it, and you start rewinding the tape. About a month ago, oh yeah, you know what? He did look at me funny last month. I'll bet you that was also, and you begin to reimagine everything that ever happens to you. So it gets worse in us, but it also gets worse in them. The problem is when you imagine that people are mad at you, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because here's how most people respond. If I believe someone's mad at me, you look at them like, hey. You walk into church like, hey, how are you? Fine. Whatever. Oh, come on, don't act like you're not like that. Whatever, Eldos. I've been your pastor for a little while. I've watched the little, the people walk around, you dodge people, you change your seats, you move, all the things, right? Well, come on now. COVID helped churches a lot because, it used to be we'd always turn around and greet people. Well, we stopped doing that. And that was very helpful, not because of COVID, because a lot of people, they'd be like, hi. I've watched it, folks. And probably most of us are guilty of that. So what happens? We are convinced that they're mad at us, so we get all weird, and then they're going, what's up with them? They must be mad at me. Now they're mad at us. And so you imagined it in your head, and it came true. So the problem is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy when you refuse to talk about these things. You'll avoid them, give them dirty looks, refuse to speak to them. So now you've got the original problem. You've got the conflict that created the drama in the first place. Now you've got this new issue, right? All the words, all the emotions that were added to it because you refused to speak to them or communicate about it. All right, I want to stop there for a moment, open for questions or comments. You've got a question or a comment this morning. Okay, Cherie.
Pastor, what if, with regards to communication, you're not very good at your words? Let's say you get into a fight, not a fight, let's say you want to resolve something. Mm-hmm. The person that you want to resolve it with is a bulldozer. Like this person is just good at debating, this person, you don't stand a chance. So I guess, from my perspective, that's why I would rather just shut down and wait for a better day to have my ducks in a row. Is that good? How can you advise someone to get better at, communicating or...
Yes, so a number of things. Obviously, I can give you some practical tips for communication, but I think, if I remember correctly, last week you asked a question, and my answer was similar. It was about expectations, right, or what we want. So what you're describing is, right, if I'm going to get my facts together, get my ducks in a row, it's because I got to win, right? But that's not the point of communication. And so I'll actually talk a little bit as we go on about that. But I've advised people in the past, sometimes you've got to say things. And, I've had people tell me, Pastor, I want to talk, but whenever I do, I get flustered or I cry or whatever. Write it. You could write it down. Say, this is kind of how I feel. This is how it makes me feel. But we've got to get it. And this is kind of the overarching theme of this series. To resolve conflict, our end goal is not to be right or prove them wrong or all these things, but it's to bring peace, right? We can bring things to light and we can have peace. The reality is, even in perfectly resolved conflict, it's not always that we're going to fix everything, right? I've resolved conflict with people, and in their minds, it's probably still wrong, right? They probably still think some weird things, but I've dealt with the issue between us, right? So there's no more drama between us, okay? So, but I'll talk in a little bit about some communication issues. Danielle.
So, Pastor, relating to what Sharia said,
Uh-huh.
I find that I communicate better when I write, so this might be the text form. So then the person on the other end, I'm just taking it, they see this whole thing and they don't get what I'm saying and the emotion that I'm putting into. So
Right.
basically me not speaking, although I'm communicating in a written form,
Right.
it still doesn't help me because you see that long text and you're just like, whatever.
They left you on red. So, yeah, we'll get into that in more depth. So, obviously, in every issue, it's going to eventually involve a face-to-face, right? Writing things is helpful. That helps us get our thoughts in order. But the biblical command is go and speak to your brother. That's always going to be required. But for me, when I deal with issues, I always write them first. I put them down. I've gone into many conversations with notes. I write, hold on, but this is what, and I've got, just so that I can communicate clearly. But we'll get into a little bit more in just a moment about some communication stuff. Shannon?
Okay, one question for now. Like,
Uh-huh.
how do you deal with a unresolved issue with someone that has passed on?
That's beyond the scope of our lesson. So the issue is forgiveness. So that's going to be the key factor. Michael.
So Pastor, you were saying that sometimes it's like a vicious cycle. If you have a conflict with someone and then it just somehow you don't deal with it,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's festering, or it's like there's this awkwardness between people. What happens if you feel this awkwardness between someone, or you feel something's there, but you don't know of any conflict?
Right.
You know what I mean? You can't think of any conflict. You don't know if there's an issue, and you think, well, how do I approach this? Because I don't feel like there's been any issue, but it seems like there might be. Do I
Right.
just ask?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done many times. I've talked to people, hey, how's it going? It seems like there's something here. Have I offended you? If I have, let me know. I'll fix it. And that's a great way to start the communication. Okay, on this side, Michaela. We're here, run.
Hi, so Pastor, I know we're all different, especially when it comes to resolving conflict. Like I know when I do that, I normally like to, sit my brother down or my sister down and have it face to face. But how do you handle a situation where somebody wants to resolve the conflict with you and you're aware of that, but you're around people and then you tell the person, can we do this, later?
Right.
And can we rather do it face to face than have it over, they either want to do it in front of everybody or do it over the phone, and when you ask them, can we just rather do it face to face, they leave you on read. And then they will speak what they want to speak right there and there in front of everyone, and then walk away, leaving me to answer all the questions because everybody's like, okay, what happened? So how do you deal with a situation like that?
Well, hang on just a moment, because the Bible actually gives us clear instruction on the process. So why don't we get into that then, since this seems to be the question of the morning. Let's talk about communication responsibility. Communication responsibility. So, I've mentioned already, a lot of conflict comes from communication. Then, of course, the exacerbating problem is that a lot of people refuse to communicate properly about conflict, so that makes it worse. So let's talk about the responsibility. The only tried and true and biblically commanded method for resolving conflict is communication. This is the Bible command, Matthew 18:15. Sorry, we got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother.
Okay, this is step one, and we'll go into this in greater depth throughout our series. But step one, you must go speak to them, and the Bible says alone. That's non-negotiable. We don't get a say-so in this. So the problem is Michaela mentioned in her question, what we want to do is we want to let everybody know. Right? Hey, right? I'm mad at them because, everyone come with me. Let's beat them up, right? So this is incorrect. So understand the key issues here. Number one, tell them you must communicate. You must communicate. That is the absolute crucial first step. So 3 truths about communication responsibility here. Number one, and if you get upset at this, oh well. So, but I believe this firmly. I believe you have absolutely no right, and by no right I mean zero. And if you want to get a scientific definition of the term zero, you have to look to someone more intelligent than me. But you have no right to remain upset if you refuse to communicate. You've lost it. You've abandoned all right. I'm mad at them. Did you talk to them? No, then you need to stop. Get over it. You're going to give that up, or you're going to talk to them. That is an absolute. God gives us one path to resolution, one path that he will bless, that he will get involved in, and that the church will help. And we'll go on. We'll talk about this. It gives us a pathway to get the church involved. So God will help us resolve conflict if we do it his way, but it starts with communication. So you have no right to remain upset if you're unwilling to communicate. Then number 2, to not communicate is unchristian. Oh man, Pastor, you know what? I was willing to just say, I forgive everybody, I give up, no, and I'm just going to walk on, and wrong answer. Matthew 18 is written to believers, and he says, if your brother has sinned against you, right, then you go tell him his fault. We don't get an out. We don't get an exemption from that. He is explaining this to Christians. These are Christian virtues, Christian responsibilities. So what he's saying is, if someone does wrong, you must communicate, or you're doing wrong. If you refuse to talk about it, now you're the sinner. I need you to grasp this. Think about the ways people violate us, right? They sin against us. They may lie about you. That's real. They are the sinner. But if you internalize this, or you publicize this, and you refuse to communicate it, now you're the sinner. This is an unchristian behavior. And then, of course, this is a personal responsibility. Matthew 18:15 again.
Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother.
Okay, this is a personal thing that you have got to do. No one can do this for you. Your friends can't do this for you. Your pastor can't do this for you. Your family can't do this for you. And this, of course, Matthew 18, we're going to enlarge this. We're going to talk about that text in greater depth in further lessons, because it does go on from this. I understand that's just the first verse. It's a lengthy passage. But this is step 1. Listen, communication. I'll just give some notes about this. Of course, we'll talk about this in greater depth later. But the emphasis of communicating alone, why that is so important is because our instinct is to rally people to our cause. This is what we do. We get mad, and at first we think, okay, I'll be better tomorrow, right? And then tomorrow we wake up and we're still mad at them, right? And then someone says, hey, what's wrong? You wouldn't believe what so-and-so did. And what you do is you get your one friend or your handful of friends, and you get people to be mad. In other words, you're getting them to join your cause and be mad at that person. That is unbiblical. And I tell you, that is wicked. That is unrighteous. We'll talk about that again in greater depth. It's childishness, right? Isn't that what we did on the playground when we were little kids? Right? You need to be mad at Susie because blah, blah, blah. We get them all together. And then, isn't that schoolyard stuff? Listen, I've been a pastor for a long time, and I realized that it would have helped me to get a degree in childhood education. I'm just being real with y'all. Okay, that was a low blow. That was a bad joke. But you see where I'm coming from. So, but our instinct is we tell everyone else what we're upset about, why we're upset, who we're upset, but we never just talk to the person. And it becomes this bigger thing. And one of the things I've counseled over the years is there's a real conflict. We butt heads, people have an issue, but then both of them, they refuse to talk. So then they talk to them. And let me just let you in on a secret. If you're mad at someone in this church and you go talk to other people, you will find other people that are also mad at that person. That's the way it works. Because we're all knuckleheads sometimes, right? But we build a case. Right? Oh, yeah. She said that, but you know what? Like a year ago, this other thing happened to this other person, right? They really are the devil. I knew it all along. And so we gathered this. But what happens is you've spent so much time talking to your friends and your family about this, it's impossible. You will never resolve this. You've built something so big when really it was just a little thing in the beginning. So, you've got to communicate. We will talk then in further lessons about the rest of Matthew 18, because then it talks about how to progress further if talking to them doesn't work. It involves getting the pastor involved, but we'll discuss that further. I want to stop, take a couple of minutes for questions this morning. If you got a question, you can raise your hand so I can see it. Bongi, over on this side. Who's faster? All right.
Pastor, on your previous point, you mentioned that sometimes the reason that people avoid communication, one of the reasons is that it's because of their past. Maybe they view whoever they need to communicate with, they view them, and they sort of take all their pain and everything that they went through the past,
Right.
and they see that person through that lens.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're doing this, and maybe you are stuck in that, and maybe if someone that you do need to communicate with about conflict, maybe if they do things that remind you of your past, and
Right.
and when they do those things, it just triggers defensive behavior in you, and you know that you do that. How do you get yourself out of that?
Well, this is going to sound like a simplistic answer, but ask God. So I can tell you from personal experience, there's been numbers of times when I've had ill feelings towards people who don't deserve it, right? Individuals, and because they remind me of someone and from my past that hurt me. And so that's in there. And I've just had to pray, God, you know what? I know this person is not like that, and I need you to heal me. Sometimes even just confession, right? There's been times I've encouraged people, you just need to confess. I know this person is not my father, right? Or I know this person cares for me, or things like that. So, but pray about it, and then when all else fails, ask for counsel. All right? But yeah, good question, Bongi. Very good. Who else? Danielle?
Sir,
Uh-huh.
if you have in the past communicated a way that's making you have conflict, it's not necessarily that you, how can I put it, there's something that person does or people does, right?
Uh-huh.
And you've communicated 1, 2, 3, you don't do this or you do this and it doesn't sit well with me, but the attitude doesn't change.
Well, I guess it would depend on the context, right? So, there's a lot of people that are never going to change, right? We can't allow that to ruin our lives. So, but if it's in the context of the home or the church, then Matthew 18 is the guide. We can talk to them. Then you can actually escalate. You can get pastor involved. We can try to bring a higher level of resolution to that. So, I know that's not much of an answer, but sometimes people are just going to keep being jerks, and we have to forgive them and move on. So we'll deal with these things in greater depth as we move on. I saw a hand this way. Was it Malemo? Yeah.
Pastor, can I just ask, how do you deal with conflict with a new convert, when you try to solve it, but you want to keep them in the church at the same time? How do you say that?
And so there would be two different categories. One, if this is conflict between yourself and a new convert, You need to err on the side of graciousness. One of the things about working with new people is, they come in strange, right, and messed up and broken. So we've got to be gracious and kind. But one of the things that I've seen happen over the years is I'm working with a new convert, but someone else is going to have a fight or a conflict with them. In those situations, I would get pastor involved early on, right, because our aim is to protect them. So, yeah, good question. Pumlani? Over here, guys.
It's more like a common question with resolving conflict in terms of the online thing. So I started checking out that when you have a conflict over the phone, specifically over WhatsApp, and then with this other person, and then later on, you resolve it, you guys say, we're good, and then they go back to the conversation, the text, the voice notes, and then it still haunts them. Would you say that it's actually advisable to not argue over the phone like that?
Well, yeah, face-to-face is the best. Of course, that's the biblical command. It's not always possible. But, on the other side of that, if that's something that you're doing, if you're going back to old resolved conflicts to dig them up, that's just foolish in the extreme. Because our memories still work. I still remember all the things people have done to hurt me, even the ones that are resolved. And I could go back and live there and dig them up. That's just a poor way to live life. So, but yeah, you need to emphasize, and just communication in general works better face-to-face. Good, what else? Simon.
So I wanted to find out, what about those more like collusion avoidance? You have this guy, you want to resolve the conflict, but they are mugged.
But they are what?
They are mugged.
Okay.
You know that, having to speak to them or either correct them, they will view it as rejection or other way around.
Right.
So you know that the moment I even open up my mouth about resolving the conflict,
Right.
they will basically shut you down. Now, how do you deal with that? Because probably, let's say on you, it's haunting you up and it's toxic. It's becoming toxic. But to them, it's like, don't touch me or else I'm going to manifest.
Right.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, we'll actually do a large portion of an entire lesson later in this series about that. But there are going to be times when we attempt to resolve conflict. We do what we need to do, and they don't respond, right? Like you're saying, they blow up, there's all this drama. There is a time when we just have to move on. Because like if I was in conflict with you, I cannot make you do right? I can only do what I know to do. And if you are not going to respond correctly, at some point, I'm going to have to get to a place where I say, you know what, I did what I was supposed to do. I worked on this, I'm going to have to move on from this. And some of those things are unresolvable, but we just move past that. But I would say there are less unresolvable conflicts in life than we think. Once we learn some of the skills that God gives us, I think that there's more we can resolve than probably we think instinctively. Does that help? All right, very good. We're going to break. Service begins in 5 minutes.